Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for part 2 of the March, technically, Q&A series for 2022. Really enjoyed answering some of the questions for part 1, so if you missed that, go back and check that out on the channel. But for now, we've got some more questions to get to, but before we do...
Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. Alright, what are your personal thoughts on the percentage gain to expect from Zen 4 and X3D chips? Well, I don't really want to talk about Zen 4 because what do we know? Concrete.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing.
And what has AMD claimed, like the realm of 10 to 15%?
10 to 15% for the 5800 X3D, which I think...
That's good.
AMD's performance claims in the past have tend to be relatively accurate compared to other vendors.
Slightly favourable, but as you'd expect.
Obviously, they'll always be favourable, but more on the accurate end of the scale. I think for Zen 4, obviously I don't know what it's going to perform like, but we can see what Alder Lake is doing today in terms of its IPC advantage and its especially single-thread performance advantage. So if it wasn't closing the gap and extending a bit of a lead over Alder Lake, it would be a bit of a fail. So they're going to need, like 20% plus more performance? So that's probably what we'd be hoping for.
Definitely. Hey guys, in the years you've benchmarked hardware, have you had any part fail on you after strenuous testing? Does benchmarking reduce a part's lifespan and by how much? Well, I don't think we have any exact data on benchmarking and reducing a part's life. Depends on what sort of benchmarking you're doing, I suppose, and by how much. No real measurements on that sort of stuff. Apart from I've had the odd SSD die or whatever, but I don't think that was from any strenuous benchmarking. That was just unlucky, to be honest. But the things that I think the one thing that stands out in my mind that definitely dies from strenuous use, and I have a rough time frame there, very rough, would be PCI Express slots. So, particularly the primary PCIe slot, so what you stick your graphics card in. So I think my last GPU test system was on a Z390 motherboard. I think it was the Aorus Ultra, really good board. I think, so the slot in that died after a few years. What CPU would that have been, like the 900K?
Something like that, yeah.
So anywho, slot died, replaced the motherboard with the exact same one, and that board is still in use. It would have been well over 1,000
an everyday user is doing that, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about benchmark scenarios. So the little retention, the first thing I do whenever I build a test system, even if it's not a GPU test system, I usually remove the retention clip off the primary slot because that's a nightmare when because that really holds the card in for transport and stuff like that, make sure the card doesn't pull away from the motherboard and then put even more pressure on the slot. So I remove that clip and that way I can just throw in, pull out graphics cards with really, as long as the DisplayPort cable or whatever I'm happy to be using is pulled out, it just comes straight out. And I've been known to do like 60 used GPU benchmarks and 30, 40, 50 GPU looks at games and things. So over the years, hundreds, thousands of GPU changes are made on a slot. You push the PCI tab into the slot and that presses the pins back. And I guess it's sort of a metal fatigue thing after doing that so many times. But what would it have been like? It'd have to be up around close to 10,000, I would have thought, that I would have got to.
I think it's mostly those connectors and things that tend to be more likely to fail from doing a lot of benchmarking. Like I've had a couple of cables fail, a couple of ports fail, that sort of thing from constantly pulling things in and out. But as far as CPUs and GPUs and those sorts of things, they tend to be fine from benchmarking.
Yeah.
No sweat for them.
No, I can't recall. I mean, I've obviously had CPUs and GPUs die over the years, but I wouldn't attribute that to benchmarking. And then the only other thing that really often shows wear is, in particular, is sleeved PSU cables. Because again, you put that and that's something I haven't actually worn out, is the power cables. So the motherboard that I wore out, I used the same power supply for that entire time and for the next board. So it's the original power supply.
Nice.
So the power supply connectors and tabs and things on those, they're pretty robust. They're obviously bigger, heavier gauge stuff than what you would get for the little fingers in the slots, I suppose. But I'm not even quite sure what fails in the slot, but it just doesn't detect the graphics card anymore. But yeah, the sleeves on the power cords, they don't really like being handled much at all. So within a month of pulling them in and out, you start to get mass fraying on the sort of the cloth type material ones. Not so much the, nylon type ones. I'm not sure what material they use there. Not really a cable sleeve expert, but that's pretty much all I can come up with.
I think benchmarking GPUs would actually be less strenuous than most normal users, because you're slotting a GPU in for testing it briefly, and then you're moving
again.
on
It
to
depends on the
product.
component. So yeah, obviously the GPU itself's not being used as heavily, but the slot is seeing much more action than you would.
Yes, a slot action.
Yeah. Moving on, DisplayPort cables are the other thing that I often break. The little pressy tabby things.
I break those all the time.
Yeah, they break regularly. They would be the most common thing I break, actually. Can't really think of it.
Yep.
Yeah, can't think of anything else off the top of my head, so moving right along. All right, you guys want Tim and I to have a big fight, I can tell. I'm just going to read it out first, then we'll get into it. It's going to be a YouTuber boxing match. What frame rate would you say is unplayable in modern games these days?
Unplayable.
No, well, it's a bit of a joke because, as many of you guys will know, Tim's more of a casual single-player game. I'm more of a competitive multiplayer gamer. And traditionally, that means that your target of unplayable frame rates is vastly different. So for single-player games, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will argue that 30 FPS is perfectly playable. Like but I would say for me personally, I don't even like playing single-player games like a Tomb Raider or whatever at 60 FPS. I still find aiming a bit janky. Not for me, 90 FPS is the minimum.
I think 90 FPS is a good target for single player
But
games.
I suppose we're talking about unplayable.
We're talking about unplayable.
Okay.
I think those games at 60 FPS are playable.
I think for me then, like 40 to 50 FPS, like let's go 40, we'll split the middle. 45 FPS is like the minimum for me.
40 feels pretty janky these days.
Yeah, it does.
40, 45
but it's not,
FPS is
I wouldn't
janky.
say it's unplayable.
Are you talking single player games? I mean,
Yeah, single player.
I think, 40 to 45 FPS is sort
I
of
wouldn't
the
enjoy it. It's not desirable,
Yeah,
but I could
it's the
play the game.
30 FPS is unplayable.
Yeah.
I'll just say it straight up. 30 FPS is unplayable.
You're going to trigger that many people in the comments, but I agree.
I'll back this up by saying, so I have a PS5, as I've mentioned a few times before. I've been playing recently Horizon Forbidden West, which is PS5 exclusive. Otherwise, I play it on PC. And it offers multiple modes. So you can choose to run it in the quality mode, which is 4K 60 FPS, or I don't know if it's real 4K, and I don't really care, but whatever. It's a high fidelity mode, 30 FPS. Or you can run at the performance mode, which is lower resolution, has a bit of shimmering and stuff going on. The quality is lower visually, but it runs at 60 FPS. And we're talking locked 30 versus locked 60. So it's not fluctuating around. It's nice and smooth. And the game defaults to 30 FPS. And I was playing this, I'm like, this feels absolutely atrocious. Flicked it up to 60 FPS, I'm like, okay, there's a bit of a quality reduction, but it plays a lot better. And even though it's not really what most people class as visual quality, but I think frame rate plays a big part in visual quality.
Big time.
Because it's not relying on as much on motion blur, which just destroys all the detail in the scene. You can, you get more detail into your eyes because there's double the amount of data going into your eyes. It's much more detailed to run at a higher frame rate, and I'll argue with people that think the other way is true. And so, I was playing at 60 FPS. I was like, there's a lot of shimmering in this. Maybe too much shimmering for me. I'll turn it back down to the 30 FPS mode. And it was like, not only was 30 FPS bad launching the game, it was horrendous when switching from 60 to 30. Like the jump down was so much worse than the jump up.
Yeah.
So for me, as soon as I was playing at 30 FPS, the input lag is just unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Oh, mate,
it feels so slow. It's so much harder to play.
You don't have to convince me. I find Windows
is horrible. At 30
unusable
FPS.
at 30 hertz.
That's horrible.
Like I can't play Excel I can't
Yeah, it's
export
horrible.
iGraphs at 30 hertz. It's like
I think
it's like drunk and moving the mouse around. It's so slow. The input's horrible. I don't know how people do it. Look, if you find 30 FPS acceptable and you're offended that we think you need more, hey, good on you. That's awesome. But I can't do it. For me, I could. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe 45 FPS, 40 to 50. 60, look, I could
60.
definitely play at 60.
60's playable.
60's playable. But again, as I've said many times, optimal for me for any game is, well, anything that's not maybe an RTS, but even maybe there, 90 FPS.
Yeah, I try to target around 100.
Yep.
I think 30 FPS gaming often relies a lot on like cheating with with heavy motion blur, so it feels smooth and stuff. But even then, it doesn't really feel that smooth.
So we've talked that single player. If we're talking about multiplayer competitive stuff, I mean, that's what multiplayer is. You're trying to win. You're trying to beat other human players. 60's like not really playable. It's not.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
It's hard. 90 again is the minimum there. I would say 90 there is my minimum, whereas I could probably get away with half of that in single player, depending on what the single player game is. But really, if any of you guys have played competitive games, whether it's like Counter-Strike or Warzone or Fortnite or PUBG or whatever it is, like you can take pretty high-end players and stick them at like 60 FPS, and players that aren't nearly as good will beat them if they're playing like 140 plus.
I think if we expand the definition of unplayables to multiplayer games to be unplayable competitively. So in other words, you'll lose. There's a significant competitive disadvantage to you. Then you'd want to be 120 FPS.
Which is kind of the point of playing them, though, right? You don't go, I want to play Warzone so I can get fragged every second.
Exactly.
I mean, I've got friends who play competitive games casually. They don't really care if they win or whatever, or how well they do, but they don't want to get crapped on the entire time, which is what, if they're playing at 45 FPS, you can't even target anyone.
I think if you're playing very casually, then you definitely wouldn't want 1% lows below 60. You'd want them to be at 60. But I think if you're trying to win and you're setting an acceptable minimum frame rate for genuinely trying
to improve your skills, or just do well,
it would be around the 120. 100 to 120.
100 at very least,
FPS. So I think there's some circumstances where 30 FPS is acceptable, not for competitive gaming, obviously. I think that is sort of your platforms like a
Chess
Steam
Master
Deck.
2000.
I was thinking more, chess
Solitaire.
you can run at 2 FPS, let's be honest. You can't 0 FPS.
Hey, those pieces, the animations and stuff.
But I think...
It just goes boop, boop, and just reappears like transported. Let's get into that.
I think portable systems like the Steam Deck, you're compromising on the system. It's you want a good battery life. You don't want it to die straight away. I think 30 FPS you could kind of make a case for.
Yes, I'd never use that though.
Yeah, I think people that do buy that sort of system, you're already getting a compromised experience. So
yeah, I'm like, I need my 144 hertz, 32-inch, 4K monitor. I'm not gaming.
Your idea of a portable gaming system is bringing your desktop, bringing a keyboard and mouse and a display, and bringing a generator and a table and a chair, so you can run all this outside as you did in that video.
Yeah, I don't get it. What's the problem?
That's your portable system.
That's my Steam Deck. Alrighty, some good news GPU prices. So GPU pricing starting to fall. The end of the chip shortage appears to be on the horizon. Looking back, what do you think was the best value for money / performance per watt, performance per dollar rather, card of the shortage? How do you think the perception of the card will change moving forward? So I think they're asking about, like, over the last 2 years, what's been the best card to buy?
Yeah, like looking back, I guess, what sort of GPU would you walk away the most happy with? I think if you were able to get like a RTX 3080 at the MSRP, you got an insanely good deal.
Or basically, if you managed to get any RDNA 2 or Ampere GPU near, well, certainly at the MSRP, but even relatively close to the MSRP, then you've done well. Like whether that was a 6600 XT, 6700 XT, RTX 3060, 3060 Ti, and so on, then any of those GPUs would have been the best because you'd be absolutely wrapped with what you got, ties you over nicely, and you don't lose too much money. Short of that, so let's say all of those GPUs, all current generation GPUs are unavailable and you're faced with having to pay scalper prices or the used market. In my opinion, a tie of a GPU like an RX 570, 580 was probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I think there has been times where those cards have been better in terms of their pricing and periods where it's been worse.
So even when the 580 was $500 though?
Yeah, it's not great. I wouldn't be wanting to pay that.
So what would you be able to sell it for even in a few months? Would you get $100 back?
You would probably have lost at least $300 on that.
So let's say you lost $500.
Yeah.
Right? What if you bought an RTX 3080 for, what were they selling for regularly?
Like $2,000?
So $2,000. And they're heading pretty close. Well, they're already half that, right? Pretty close to half that. So you've lost $1,000 there. So that's twice the RX 580. Yeah, you had a better experience. But
you did.
Depends on what you're playing and how happy you were with like 1080p medium.
Either of these options sounds absolutely terrible.
It sounds terrible, but I guess it's hard it depends on.
I think it was mostly making do, like the real winners were people that waited and made do with what they had. Obviously this doesn't apply to people building a new system where maybe a tie over GPU made sense. But certainly looking back, I think the people that were able to accept medium settings, accept that, maybe I have a 900 series GPU from NVIDIA. It's not great these days, but it's good enough to play games. Like I could play it on low settings or whatever. I think those people have come out pretty well because now the pricing is looking okay. We're just about to head into another generation. I think if you were forced to buy a new GPU from the current series, so if we're ruling out tie over GPUs, there have been times when products like a 6700 XT and 6600 from AMD have been reasonable value, especially compared to NVIDIA parts.
If you had to buy new, they would have been the way to go.
It's still not.
I think
I'm not sitting here saying like those people got a great deal because they kind
of.
No
one got a great deal anyway. There's no great deals to be had. That's for sure.
Even today, there's better deals, but I wouldn't say there's necessarily as many great deals on GPUs. Whereas I think for people selling their GPUs, if you had a 5700 XT, you made out like an absolute bandit.
I was going to say, I think if it's not the question that's being asked, but if we sort of morph this question into what was the best GPU to buy prior to the latest cryptocurrency boom / pandemic, I think the Radeon RX 5700 XT or 5700 was the answer there. Yeah, because even despite the inflated crappy prices, you got a 6700 XT upgrade for free.
Exactly. Yeah, you could. I think at the peak, 5700 XTs were selling at like $800, $900, like well over double what they cost for an old GPU. Like So those people really made out. People that
and that's because and for those unaware, the reason for that was because they were so much better at mining than RDNA was much better at mining than RDNA 2.
Yeah, relative to the gaming performance that you were getting from that particular
so
card.
The gaming performance was much better on RDNA 2, but the mining performance was better on the older cards. Therefore, the older cards went up further in value. So it was basically a straight swap. You got like, what's the percentage difference? 20, 30%
Something
more?
around 20 to 30%.
Yeah, like a 30% gaming upgrade for free.
And that was upgrading your used GPU, which could have been used for like a couple of years, straight into a new product. So that was a really good deal for people. You could do similar if you had been lucky enough to buy into Vega. Vega's obviously a lot older, but also those products were massively inflated. And really the whole, even people who had 5600 XTs and stuff could get really good prices for those cards.
Yes.
And made out well.
It's like the Radeon 7 was, in my opinion, massively inferior to like the RTX 2080 in terms of value and what it offered for gaming. But again, it turned out to be a much better value product if you held on to it for that long. But that's one of those things where you had an inferior product for multiple years before you could cash in on it. Still turned out to be a good deal at the end of the day.
The 5700 XT was actually a pretty decent product.
Very, very competitive, very good product.
Obviously, these days it doesn't have features like ray tracing, which makes it, you'd probably be thinking of upgrading soon for
my opinion is still like at that performance tier, how useful is ray tracing? That argument could be had with certain people forever and a day. But
you could have upgraded for free to a card that had ray tracing. That was faster and everything.
Yeah, it's like the 6700 XT, even more so than like the Turing-based graphics cards. Like, is it worth even mentioning the word ray tracing when talking about a 6700 XT?
Well, so you get it for free, so it was definitely worth upgrading.
I mean, it's a fast... You're not getting it for that, though. You're getting it for the fast rasterization performance. Anyway, probably should move on before I go too far down that rabbit hole. Steve, what do you do with the motherboard collection when you finished torturing the VRMs? I have just shelves for days in here. So what's all there, Tim? What are all those?
Those look like B660 boards. You've got about 20 of them.
Yeah, so around the corner, I've got about 20 B560 boards, B550, Z590, Z690. So I'll probably just keep building more studios and more shelves. Basically, I definitely keep the worst and the best boards, and then the middle of the pack boards that I'm probably not going to look at again. Sometimes they get palmed off to friends or video editors, colleagues. You know, Tim Hoover's up a lot of my doubles. But yeah, generally speaking, I would keep probably 70% of them, which is a problem, I know.
You're addicted. You got a problem.
Well, I do have a storage problem. I am quickly running out of space. But yeah, I mean, I can't part with a lot of them because there may be, it's so good to have such a variety of boards on hand for future testing, whether it be like, you know, the AMD Boost thing. Hardly any reviewers had like 20 X570 boards on hand, but I did from the VRAM testing and I kept them all.
Yep.
So months later, I was able to load the latest BIOS on, look at the frequency issue. When older boards like get updated BIOS support for new CPUs, I can use those boards and go back. So it is handy to have them, which is one of the reasons why I keep the worst boards and the best boards, because the worst boards you can see, do they support new CPUs, and the best boards represent the best of that platform. So
you just need more sheds. Just build another shed.
yeah, that's basically, I've still got plenty of room in the other shed. So it's going to be, we're at least 10 chipset generations away from that being a problem. Alrighty, I can't imagine the hundreds of thousands of email promotions that you receive from companies who want their products to be seen on Hardware Unboxed. Can you recall top 5 products that had nothing to do with PC gaming tech? Well, you don't get these emails, do you, really?
I get some of them through my TechSpot email. Actually, quite a lot through my TechSpot
for Hardware Unboxed or for TechSpot?
Well, for anything, really. So some people think that's the way to contact us. So anyway, what are your best ones that you've got?
I jotted down a few here. I don't know what order you'd put them in, I guess. So energy drinks, that comes up a lot. You know, those sort of gamer-focused energy drink things, which we're not getting involved in. Same with like different types of coffee beans and things. Bit bizarre. Sex toys. We get sex toys come our way every now and then. Yep. So Amazon sellers and stuff like that. Bit weird. Obscure things like mattresses. We had a company, I can't remember the name of the company, but anyway, we probably not going to get into the mattress advertising business. And then stuff like more recently, like vehicle auction sites and stuff like that.
That's such a bizarre one.
Yeah.
I've had stuff like a lot of like vacuum cleaners.
Yes, robotic ones in particular.
Yeah, just all sorts of like the robotic vacuum cleaners. And the things that annoy me the most are things like iPhone cases.
No, yeah.
Because it's just insistent spam. And
yeah.
I think I've had a few as well of like concerts. Like from artists.
Okay, I don't think I've come across that.
Yeah, you know, the latest, and it's never a major artist. It's like some obscure person that's doing some concert in the United States. I'm like, why am I getting this email? Like, I don't deal with this. And then obviously in the last couple of years, a lot of the like cryptocurrency and NFT related stuff is just gone crazy. Just like instant spam anything that says NFT or crypto in it. Or
I don't think that surprises anyone. So lots of that for sure.
We definitely get heaps of spam, but luckily we also get lots of useful emails. So you've said in the past, probably multiple times,
you reckon?
That the 6500 XT was so bad that Navi 24 probably shouldn't have even been released for desktop. What are your thoughts on the Radeon Pro W6400 based on the same die? Is it possibly the worst GPU ever released?
Well, I don't think I specifically said I don't think it should have been released for desktop. Apologies if I did say that, but what I would have meant was it wasn't meant to be released at, what is it, $200?
$200, yeah.
It's a $100 product max. Like usually, I think historically you would have paid like $70 for it or something.
Yep.
But yeah.
RX 550 sort of thing, yeah.
Exactly right. So to clarify, if I did make that mistake, I think it should have been released on desktop at half the price if it was to be released on desktop. Now, to answer your question, I don't know much about the workstation GPUs. My understanding is that's a low profile only model. It is a cut down version of the die, so the performance will be even worse. It still has a 4GB VRAM buffer. I don't actually know who it's for, but again, not an expert on workstation cards and who would use them for what or why they would want a really slow 4GB RDNA 2 card. Not sure, but it potentially could be a better product depending on what angle you're coming from, in the sense that Yeah, it's going to be a lot slower, but it's an LP card and it doesn't require external power. So that makes it useful in like certain applications that you couldn't use a regular 6500 XT for.
Okay.
But look, it's a garbage product. All right.
What if I counter your low profile and not needing a PCIe power connector with, it's a workstation card that you can't run video encoding on because it's not supported.
That's what, I don't know what it's for. I don't know what it's for.
And the second thing is that it only has 2 display outputs. So it's not meant for workstations that want to run a lot of monitors like you would normally add a card in for.
Look, you're making my sales pitch here very difficult,
I
Tim.
think your sales pitch has failed. And that, yeah, it's probably
also for
bad.
gamers, if you want an LP card, there is the GTX 1650, which is, I think, about the same price and going to offer more performance. So as a gamer that wants an LP card, you absolutely shouldn't buy it. AMD's workstation.
It is a very odd workstation card.
Yeah,
omitting those features.
Look, I think what I was getting at is I don't know if it's more terrible than the 6500 XT. They are both terrible. I'm not sure which one is more terrible.
Fair enough.
Is what I'm trying to get at, okay?
Yeah. What are your opinions on small form factor PCs? Just curious because I've been seeing more and more good and affordable ITX cases in the last year, but the increase in the average thickness and lengths of graphics cards has made a lot of newer cards not compatible with plenty of those cases. So it's a bit odd to get those builds figured out lately. So yeah, what do you think?
There's definitely a lot of challenges with those smaller builds because, as you say, you don't need necessarily an ITX form factor graphics card, but that will make it easier for a lot of cases. There are some cases that support larger cards. And I think the other challenge is probably motherboards. With a lot of the chipset series, people have been asking, like B660 as an example, I think there's like 3 boards. There's 2 high-endish boards, one's DDR5, and then there's a low-end board from ASRock that probably won't run half of the CPUs on the platform, at least at full performance. So not many options there. So that's a problem. But I think, like, I don't know, I've always viewed ITX personally as a bit of a novelty and not that practical. I know that's going to upset a lot of people. They're going to get really angry because they love their ITX system, which I've built plenty of ITX systems and love them. They're really cool. But why I say they're a novelty is because generally at some point you want to upgrade something or you want to change something and then it's an absolute nightmare to do that. I don't know, they're kind of like a pre-built vibe to them. Like once you've built them, you don't really want to have to change anything.
I think it's for people that really appreciate the building process. Like if that's the reason why you're building a PC, then the ITX building process is much more of a challenge than your traditional
For
case.
sure.
And there's a lot of satisfaction of fitting all the parts in, making it really compact. Like, yeah, the ITX systems I've built, I've really loved that process. But at the end of the day, it is less practical of a solution than a standard desktop. For upgrades, you know, ITX parts typically cost more. So if you need a smaller form factor GPU or you need that low profile cooler, you know, you're going to sacrifice cooling power and potential. And the cases, you know, it tends to be a bit more expensive than a typical case. So
for me, it was always a novelty getting a really powerful system in a really small case. That was always a bit of fun. But then ultimately when it came to using it, I just never did. I guess if you really, you know, size constraints, space, whatever, you're in a small apartment, then, you know, could make sense, could be practical there. But for most people, it's like
putting the aesthetics.
Putting a full ATX case somewhere is not a big deal. And it just makes upgrading and alterations in the future much easier. So I'm certainly not against them. So I don't want to be too negative or sound like I think they're not worth it or against them. It's just, for me personally, not practical for me, hasn't really worked. And you guys have seen my desk area. You know, I can put multiple full-size cases around there. So yeah, I'll probably build an ITX system for my home theater setup that I just got in here. Not that I need to save the space, but I'll probably do it anyway, just because I think for home theater PCs in particular, the ITX form factor has a lot to offer.
Yeah, you don't want to have a massive case in your living room, which might be a bit more tastefully set up than a gaming setup.
Yeah, and I generally build those systems and leave them there for years without tinkering with them. So it's sort of a build and forget type thing.
Yeah, it might need to fit into a cupboard or cabinet or something like that.
I'm not expanding on storage and changing, you know, upgrading the graphics card and all that kind of stuff. So don't take it as me being too negative towards them. If you love them and you think they're brilliant, hey, that's great. Okay, any interest in looking into BCLK overclocking locked Intel processors, so non-K SKU models? Some ASUS Strix boards are capable of overclocking a 12400F to 5 GHz plus, for example. It'd be nice to know if there are any cheaper boards. The ASRock Steel Legend boards are rumored to support it, but there is no confirmation. So no interest at all because no affordable boards do support this feature. You've got to spend, like I think with MSI, you've got to spend significant amount of money to get a B660 or Z690 board that supports it for non-K SKU parts. And that's pretty much the same with Gigabyte and Asus. As you say, you've got to buy a Strix board. They're always very expensive. As for the Steel Legend, I'd be surprised if it does, but no one seems to have been able to confirm it. That's largely because the board's been impossible to buy. Not sure if it's available in Australia yet. I've seen that it's now available in the US, but I'm done with B660 stuff, so I'm not going to go back and buy that board. And ethically, I'm not even sure how much we should support ASRock or promote their products. So that's a whole different topic. But I wouldn't buy the Steel Legend in the hope that it supports that feature. I would rather assume that it doesn't and wait till someone can confirm that it does. If the Steel Legend, the VRAM on that board looks okay, looks decent. If the Steel Legend did support overclocking of locked CPUs, it would actually be the go-to board. So really, if that is the case, ASRock are foolish in not making that known to reviewers. They should be like shoving these boards down reviewers' throats and saying, you can overclock with this BIOS version, because it would be the go-to board. You would buy nothing else. I think you can get it for like $160. So that would be the only board you would look at. So I doubt it's the case. All right, another one here, Tim. Stop looking at me like that, freaking me out. If the 4070/7700 XT, it takes me so long to get those slight number differences worked into my head. But if the next generation mid-range GPUs, is another way of putting it, gets 8 gigabytes of VRAM, would that be enough for modern games in the near future? Would the high-speed/bandwidth VRAM help cope with lower amounts, so lower capacities? So firstly, the whole VRAM discussion is confusing, and it really depends on what class of GPU you're talking about. So we had a bit of a sore point with, say, the RTX 3070, because what's that, like five? Am I off? Is it $500?
It was supposed to be $500.
Supposed to be $500, yeah. Yep. So that's, I think we'll agree, $500 US in a normal market is a relatively expensive part. I mean, I would classify it as the second highest GPU, given that the 3090s are dumb.
Yeah, the second highest tier of GPU you would actually consider buying.
Exactly. Yeah. So high-end product, only 8 gigabytes of VRAM, whereas the competition have 12, 16 gigabytes. So for me, that is a bit of a sore point of that product. It really should have had 12, 16 gigabytes of VRAM, not 8. But if we're talking about lower-end models, like RX 6600s, 6600 XTs, if RTX 3060s, I don't really care too much about those as long as they've got, the bare minimum, which I would consider 8 gigabytes to be that, or maybe 6, but probably 8 going forward. Yep. But that's fine. So it'd be weird if the 7700 XT got only 8 gigabytes, given the 6600 XT, but I sort of know that's rumored. And then the 4070, obviously it was a problem for us with the 3070, so I'd say the 4070, yeah, it'd suck if it only got 8 gigabytes of VRAM.
I think it would suck more than the current cards for two reasons. The first is that the card is going to be a lot more powerful.
Yeah, 2 years later.
So it is 2 years later, it's going to be more powerful. Even if it was very conservatively the performance of an RTX 3080, they would therefore be taking 3080 performance with a 10 gig VRAM buffer, 12 gig on some cards, and bringing that down to 8 gig, which would be a downgrade in terms of the capabilities of the card. And secondly, they're probably going to be pretty expensive. Let's say they're $600. Is that acceptable at $600 in 2022? Yeah, I would have said no.
Definitely no on that one.
Whereas if the 4070 was, say, a $350 to $400 card, and it was still relatively powerful and had 8 gig, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I can sort of get around this. But I think what's much more likely to happen is what I was just talking about in being quite a powerful card, quite expensive, and then I think 8 gigabytes is just not acceptable at that point.
Yeah, so I think by mid-2022, or just say 2022, I would say that at $500 plus, 12 gigabytes would be the minimum accepted amount.
Yeah. Yep.
And I would say at around $300, or really anything above what, 250 should be 8 gigabytes minimum.
Well, the GTX 1060 6GB came out 5 years ago and was $250. So
Right.
I think
Yeah, I think 8
that sort of card has to be bare minimum 8 gig. Like you can't, like 2022, what
Yeah.
are we going backwards? Like that cannot be lower than 8 gig.
Probably anything over $200, really.
Yeah, like the 3050
And
is
then-
an 8 gig card.
And
these days.
4 gigabyte should be sub $100.
4 GB is like you're not expecting this to run modern games.
Yeah,
So that's
sub $100.
dead / entry level.
So 6 gigabyte, you could get away between like 100 to 200.
Yeah, a 6500 XT class product should have 6 gigabytes of memory in
And
that
then,
generation.
and then
You can't have from $100 to $600 being for 8 gigabytes.
No.
I think they've just got to bite the bullet there and sort of, like I know that the memory bus configurations and stuff mean that
determine how much.
sometimes you can't just put 12 gig versus 8 gig. You have to go from 8 straight to 16. But I think if the options were 8 and 16 at $500, they definitely should be going 16. But ideally, they'd probably want to meet in the middle somewhere. But certainly 8 gig, yeah, it's going to be cutting it fine.
Yep, definitely. I mean, it's completely unacceptable already for high-end products.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see quite a few examples where it tanks at playable frame rates.
Yep.
So, all right, Tim, I have seen some commenters, actually I have as well, claiming that the RTX 3090 Ti isn't dumb because it's the best of the best, so the price doesn't matter. Rich people can just buy it. What are your thoughts on this? So I have seen that. I saw like 4 of those comments. I replied to, I think, 2 of them. Didn't make much headway in the discussion. But, gee, there's a lot to be said about this one.
Is there, though? Because I have a very simple opinion on this.
Okay.
If you want to buy the most expensive, fastest card that's marketed as the fastest card and you're rich, you literally don't need a review. You just go to the store, you buy the most expensive thing, and you're done. There's no need to check a review.
Yeah, so but this guy's claiming the 39, or these people that have this opinion are claiming the 3090 Ti isn't dumb, which is, I called it dumb. And then they give various reasons for why it's not dumb. So rich people will just buy it anyway, so therefore it's smart for NVIDIA. And it's like, okay, that is out of context with why I'm calling it dumb. So I'm not reviewing the GPU, which is essentially what you're saying, for rich people only, but not only just rich people who don't care about what they do with their money. They just want the best of the best because they're rich and therefore they get the best of the best. It's heavily generalizing how there's plenty of rich people that are frugal or quite intelligent with their investments. Yeah. So they'll come in and they may not bat an eyelid at a $10,000 GPU, but they'll say to the sales guy, after a GPU for gaming, what ones make sense? They'll go, well, here's the RTX 3080. This is pretty much the cream of the crop. It costs this much money, or you can spend 100% more for 10% more performance. You've got all the money in the world. What do you want to do? It's like, well, that doesn't really sound like a good value deal to me. I'll go with the RTX 3080, which is what I think a lot of well-off people would do.
Yep.
Just because they've got money doesn't, it's the sort of more money than sense type argument. So it's taking out of context, because this happens all the time, and we say our product's dumb, and then someone's like, it's not a dumb product. NVIDIA makes so much more money off it. It's smart. It's like, first of all, you should never have that outlook. That should never be your opinion as someone who's watching a review, because why are you watching the review if you care about NVIDIA making more money? And we're not reviewing it for NVIDIA.
Yeah, so if we're making a review and the goal of the review is to take the perspective of the manufacturer and sort of saying, how is this product good for the manufacturer?
Yeah.
Then we would be criticizing every single cheap GPU ever released.
Yeah.
We'd be like, this
is a waste of silicon.
This is a $300 GPU. Why isn't it $10,000?
Yeah.
It's a stupid argument. But I think when it comes to it being a dumb product, it doesn't matter if it's dumb. It literally doesn't matter. If you're a rich person going to a store, it doesn't matter whether it's dumb. If you just want the best and you're willing to spend as much money as possible, it doesn't matter what people say.
I think
the reviews aren't for those customers. No. It literally doesn't matter.
And it's a silly generalization, because there's probably just as many, again, I have no evidence to support this claim, but it would not surprise me in the least. There's probably just as many people who aren't rich that aren't in a position to purchase a 3090 Ti, but they're not very good with money. They're like, oh, I just got my tax return, and rather than save that for a rainy day, I'm going to buy, and look, you guys can do whatever you want with your money. I'm not judging. I'm just saying there are probably just as many people who buy a 3090 Ti that aren't, loaded and rolling in cash, but they've got a bit of a safety net there, a bit of a buffer, and they've gone and blown it on a 3090 Ti because they want the best of the best. And look, again, if you want to experience the best of the best, just it makes you feel good or it's fulfilling, whatever the reason, hats off to you, go for it. If that works for you, then do it. Me personally, if I was a rich person wanting to buy a or was in the position to buy a 3090 Ti, I would rather buy two 3080s because you'd probably save some money there and give one to a friend, a family member, someone who needs it, kid across the road who's struggling for an upgrade. For me, that would be more fulfilling and more useful because A, you're not going to notice the difference when you actually game. If you have a 3080 or a 3090 Ti, you're almost never going to notice the difference. So...
Pretty much.
What?
Yeah, but yeah, it's 100% taking out of context. And I think these words that sometimes appear in thumbnails or titles or whatever, another one that people often take out of context a lot is the word cheap. People get very annoyed when we say something is cheap when it's not $50.
Yeah.
And it's like, obviously we mean relatively cheap, as in
relative to other products in the market,
like of
similar quality.
Like a $5,000 car is a cheap car, but a $5,000 GPU is not a cheap GPU. So,
a $100,000 Ferrari is a cheap car.
It's a cheap Ferrari, right? So whenever we're saying things like it's dumb, it's bad, it's stupid, it's cheap, whatever the words we use, it's always relative to some aspect of the review. And clearly when you're saying the 3090 Ti is dumb, you're talking about the price to performance. Obviously for people who need, let's say you have a workload that you're a workstation user, you have a workload that for some reason doesn't run on 3090 because it's not quite fast enough, the extra 10% of the performance is going to see your workload
You're
succeed,
clutching at straws on this one.
Then it's not dumb for that person, but we're not talking about that person.
Yeah, and also that just scenario doesn't exist.
Well, yes, it doesn't exist, but
but I know what
you know
you're
what I'm
saying.
saying.
But you could conceivably make that argument for the RTX 3090.
Yeah.
Because it has more than twice the VRAM.
Yeah,
and
so
therefore
it's not done for workstations.
So it's clearly done for gamers.
Yep.
There's no two ways about that. But for workstations, it has a use. But the 3090 Ti can't make that argument.
Yeah, so it's more dumb. But so whenever you see those words used in titles and thumbnails and stuff, it's not relating to every single aspect to the product.
Yeah, and it's certainly not relating to the company's side of the story. We don't care if NVIDIA is making more money off it. We care what it does for you, not NVIDIA or AMD or Intel or whatever company it may be. Yeah. Which should go without saying, but for some reason it doesn't sometimes.
Yeah, well. All right, and that pretty much does it for this month's Q&A series. We just managed to not sneak it in this time. But yeah, really enjoyed answering a lot of those questions. Had some, really interesting ones this month. Good variety, as Steve, I think, mentioned in part 1, but it was so long ago now, I can't quite remember what he said.
It was a whole month ago.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. What else? We've got our 20% club for watching to the end of the video. Thank you very much. You can always subscribe to the channel if you want cool content, I guess.
That's pretty much all we do.
We sometimes make cool content.
Yeah, we're basically a cool content channel, let's be honest.
Yeah.
The coolest content.
If you want even cooler content, that's available for Patreon and FloatPlay members who are extra special, and they get access to the live stream that we just did, BTS videos where I think Steve painted a wall and looked at it a bit, and that was interesting.
It was crazy.
It was crazy. Action-packed, that episode. And yeah, just Discord community, all sorts of good stuff. So always consider subscribing. Got our links in the description or whatever. And guess that pretty much does it. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.